Ghost Zero, the Admiral, was on one knee, not in ceremony, not in prayer, on the floor of a bar in jeans and a polo shirt, breathing hard like he'd run from the parking lot without deciding to stop. 2 stars on his collar that morning. None visible now. Around him, 50 people stood without moving. Veterans, active duty, men who had seen things that don't make the evening news. Every one of them was looking at the same place, a woman on a bar stool. She was holding a glass of water. Her gray t-shirt had a beer stain across the left shoulder. Her hair was pulled up in a loose knot, a few strands falling across her face. She looked like someone who had just finished a very long shift and wanted very much to be left alone. The Admiral looked up at her. She did not look down at him. 40 minutes earlier, no one in that room had any idea who she was. The Iron Flag Bar sits 3 blocks from Naval Base Coronado, on a street where traffic thins out after 9, and the parking lot fills with pickup trucks and older sedans carrying base stickers on the windshields. The sign above the door is a painted American flag crossed with an anchor. The wood inside is dark and worn smooth by decades of elbows and forearms. The lighting is low. The jukebox leans toward country music from an era most of the regulars actually lived through. It is not a tourist bar. There are no cocktail menus. The bottles behind the bar are arranged without flourish, and the man who pours them, a former Army Ranger named Briggs, does not ask what you want if you've been coming long enough for him to know. He just pours it. He has worked at the Iron Flag for 11 years, which is long enough to have seen every variety of military posturing and civilian collision that a bar like this can produce. He thought he had seen everything. Thursday nights draw a particular crowd, men who have been somewhere, men whose shoulders carry things that don't put down easily. Some come in groups loud and loose, the way men are when they've recently come off rotation. Most come alone. Sarah Cole came alone. She pushed through the door at 10:14 on a Thursday night in October, and the cold air came in with her, and then the door swung shut, and the warmth of the room settled back into the space she had moved into. She stood for a moment just inside the entrance, not hesitating, looking. Her eyes moved across the room in a pattern so practiced it had stopped being conscious somewhere around the time it became necessary to survive. Exit behind the bar, exit left by the pool tables. 3 open stools at the bar, Briggs with his back turned, stacking glasses. A group of 4 near the dartboard, loud late 20s. A man in the far corner booth, army jacket, faded to the color of old grass. A bottle of amber in front of him, staring into it like it owed him something. A man at the far end of the bar who was not drunk enough to explain the way he was sitting. Upright, still, hands around his glass without squeezing. His eyes had found her the moment she came through the door. He had not looked away. His name was Harlan. She didn't know that yet. He had known her name for 3 years. She took a stool near the middle of the bar, 1 seat between herself and the nearest person, and she set her phone face down on the polished wood and waited. Briggs turned. He looked at her once. Then he filled a glass with water-added ice and set it in front of her without a word. She said, "Thank you." He nodded and went back to his glasses. She had been in the emergency room at Coronado Medical Center since 8 that morning. 14 hours and 6 minutes, though. She had stopped counting around hour 10 when the new crew came in, short 2 people, and the attending asked if she could stay. She had stayed. She always stayed. There had been a motorcycle accident at noon, a construction fall at 3, a cardiac event at 5:30 that had taken everything she had for 40 minutes straight, her hands moving with a precision that the supervising physician would later describe to a colleague as unsettling in the best possible way. At 9:45, the last of her patients had been transferred or discharged. She had changed out of her scrubs in the locker room and driven here. She did not go home first. She had learned over 10 years of emergency medicine that going home first was a mistake. The quiet of an apartment after a day like that was a particular kind of loud. She sipped her water. In the far corner, the man in the army jacket turned his glass slowly between his palms. His name was Kowalski. He was 53, though he looked closer to 65, and he had been drinking at the Iron Flag on Thursday nights for longer than Briggs had worked there. He was drunk in the way he was always drunk, by this hour not sloppy, not gone, but softened at the edges, in a way that sometimes made him sharper rather than duller. He had spent 12 years as a signals intelligence analyst attached to Joint Special Operations Command before the drinking made that impossible. He had processed after-action reports from operations that did not officially occur. He had read files on operators who did not officially exist. He had a particular memory, the kind that is a gift until it becomes a burden, and he had been carrying certain things in it for a long time without anyone to set them down with. He noticed the scar on her left wrist when she sat down. Small, circular, slightly puckered at the edges, the way tissue heals when something has passed through it at significant velocity. He had seen scars like that before in photographs and documents, with classification levels he had not encountered before or since. He said nothing. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a coin. Challenge coin. Military issue, the kind units made for themselves. This one was worn smooth on both faces, the image nearly gone from years of handling. He set it on the table and began rolling it between his fingers end over end. His eyes went back to his glass. The door opened at 10:27. 5 men, Navy-issue haircuts on 4 of them. The 5th was completely bald, and he was the kind of man who made a room smaller just by entering it. His name was Decker. He was 31 years old and built with the chest and shoulders of someone who had treated physical conditioning as a personal religion since the age of 17. 2 Bronze Stars, a Navy Commendation Medal. He had done things in places you'd find on a map only if you knew what you were looking for. He was very good at his job. He was also at this moment looking for an audience. The group settled in with the practiced ease of men accustomed to occupying space. Decker went to the bar, ordered for all 5 without asking what anyone wanted, picked up his bottle and turned to survey the room with the satisfaction of a man who has arrived exactly where he intended. His eyes moved across the bar and stopped at the woman in the gray t-shirt. She was not looking at him, she was looking at her phone. He said something to the man beside him. The man grinned. Decker pushed off the bar and moved toward her with his bottle swinging at his side, and the 4 men behind him tracked the movement with the attention of people who know they are about to be entertained. He stopped beside her stool. She didn't look up. He let a beat pass. Then he leaned forward, and the bottle caught the edge of the bar, and a splash of beer landed across her left shoulder, soaking through the gray fabric in a dark spreading stain. He straightened. Oops. He didn't say it like an apology. My bad, sweetheart. She looked down at the stain. He waited for what usually came next. The flinch, the embarrassment, the social retreat of someone who understood she was not supposed to be here, who would make her departure as smooth and frictionless as possible. She reached over and pulled 3 napkins from the dispenser. She began to blot the stain, slowly, methodically, the way you work when something needs doing and the distraction around it is not relevant. This bar's for warriors, Decker said, not tourists. You'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Behind him, his teammates laughed. She said nothing. He set his bottle on the bar beside her, leaned closer. His voice dropped to something meant to be heard only by her, which in a quiet bar meant everyone. I'm talking to you. His hand closed around her left wrist. What happened next would be discussed in the Iron Flag for a long time, and the descriptions would vary depending on where in the room the witness was standing, because the truth was that no one saw it clearly. Not because it was fast, exactly though it was, but because it did not look like the thing it was. She didn't lurch. She didn't spin. There was no telegraphed preparation. One moment she was on her stool with a man's hand on her wrist. The next moment she was standing or almost standing, and Decker was face down on the bar and his arm twisted behind him at an angle that communicated very clearly that additional movement would be a serious mistake. He had not struck anything. He had simply arrived at the bar horizontally with a precision of placement that suggested he had been put there rather than fallen there. Sarah Cole held him for 2 seconds. Then she released his arm, stepped back, and sat down. She picked up her water. Decker's 4 teammates had gone completely still. The group near the dartboard had stopped moving. Briggs had stopped polishing the glass in his hand. In the corner, Kowalski was not rolling his coin anymore. He was watching with the focused attention of a man who has just seen something he filed away years ago in a document he was never supposed to discuss, and is now confronted with the fact that the document was real. Decker pushed himself upright. His face was red. The marks on his wrist where her grip had been were already whitening toward bruises. Lucky shot, he said. The words had less behind them than he intended. Captain Mercer, the lone female officer in Decker's group, stepped forward. Her posture was the posture of someone trained to command, and she wore it well. You just assaulted a United States Navy SEAL, she said. Do you understand what that means? Sarah set her glass on the bar. When your divers run underwater navigation in zero visibility, she said, and a dive buddy blacks out at 15 feet, what does your left hand do before your right hand moves? Mercer's composure held, but something shifted beneath it. How would you? Because the recovery position in your current manual increases the risk of secondary drowning by 30%, Sarah said. Any operator who has actually managed a blackout casualty in a combat diving scenario would know that. The room had stopped pretending to do anything else. Victor, the private contractor, who had been sitting near the back, stood. He was large in the way that suggests a long professional relationship with physical violence, and he moved with the forward lean of someone who had rarely been stopped by anything softer than a wall. He covered the distance in 4 steps. His hand came toward her shoulder with the momentum of someone who has not considered the possibility of a different outcome. She was still on her stool. What Victor would say later to the men who asked was that he was not entirely sure what had occurred. He had reached for the woman, he had made contact with something, and then the room had changed orientation, and his diaphragm had contracted in a way that converted breathing from an automatic process into an aspiration. Sarah Cole had not stood up. The water glass was still on the bar where she had set it. Briggs put down the glass he'd been holding for the last 3 minutes. He reached under the bar and placed a Glock 19 on the wood in front of him. Unloaded. He used it for the concealed carry classes he ran Sunday mornings in the back room. "You talk like someone who knows weapons," he said. He was watching her with an expression that had nothing left of the bartender's neutrality in it. "Show me." Field strip. "How fast?" She looked at the weapon. 17 seconds with the right setup, she said. Closer to 23 one-handed. "Range record in this bar is 32, Briggs said, set by a SEAL Team 6 operator. She looked at the Glock for a moment longer. Then she picked it up with her left hand. Her right hand did not move the water glass. What followed had no performance in it. That was the thing that stayed with people afterward. There was no flourish, nothing that asked you to be impressed. Her movements were so deeply practiced, they had gone past economy and arrived at something like inevitability, the way a river finds a channel that was always there. The slide came off. The barrel cleared. The recoil spring assembly separated in one continuous motion. Each component went down on the bar in a line oriented exactly as a trained armorer would place them. Her right hand had not moved. Her expression had not changed. Briggs looked at the components. 15.4 seconds, he said. One hand. He said it quietly. Then he looked at the 2 numbers she had given him, 17 and 23, and he looked at 15.4, and the arithmetic of that sat on his face for a moment before he carefully put it somewhere else and went back to being a bartender. The silence in the room had changed texture. Something had shifted in the collective understanding, and the shift was not reversible. Decker stepped forward. His pride had taken damage it had no experience with, but he was a man who knew how to move through discomfort, and he moved through it now the only way he knew. "Everyone who's served has a call sign," he said, loud enough for the room. "If you're what you're acting like, you have one, so let's hear it. What's your call sign?" In the corner, Harlan set his phone face down on the table. He had been on a call for 3 minutes. He was no longer on it. His face had gone somewhere private behind his eyes, and whatever was there had weight. 25 years in special operations had given him a stillness that most people mistook for calm. It was not calm. Sarah Cole set her water glass on the bar. She looked at Decker. She looked at Mercer. She looked at the room. Then she said 2 words. "Ghost Zero." The bottle slipped from Decker's hand. It didn't shatter. It hit the floor and bounced once, and the beer spread across the dark wood, and nobody looked at it. Decker was standing with his hands still in the position it had been in when the bottle left it, like his body had not yet received the information that the bottle was gone. His face had gone the color that emergency room nurses learn to recognize. Blood leaving fast. A brain trying to process something that doesn't fit any existing category. From the corner, Kowalski's challenge coin rolled off the edge of his table. He didn't catch it. It hit the floor with a single metallic note that rang through the silence like something struck on purpose. He was on his feet without meaning to be. His bloodshot eyes were fixed on Sarah Cole, and in them was the specific clarity of a man who has spent years telling himself that something he read in a classified document could not have been done by a single person under those conditions, and who is now standing in a bar in San Diego understanding that he was wrong. He said one word, barely audible. Impossible. Mercer's hand had come up near her mouth. Harlan was standing beside his booth, and something in his face had the quality of a man who has been waiting for a particular moment for a long time and is now inside it and finding that the preparation was both adequate and completely inadequate simultaneously. The door to the Iron Flag opened. He was in jeans, a dark polo shirt collar, open no jacket. He was breathing with the effort of someone who had run farther than planned and hadn't waited for his body to agree to stop. His hair was gray at the temples. His eyes came through the door, already moving the immediate sweep of a man who had never fully turned that off. Admiral Beckett was 61 years old and commanded Naval Special Warfare Command from an office at Coronado that he was technically still supposed to be in. He had received a phone call 19 minutes ago. He had not waited for a driver. His eyes found Sarah Cole. He took 3 steps into the room. Then Admiral Beckett went down on one knee on the floor of the Iron Flag bar. "Master Chief Cole," he said. His voice had something in it that men his age carry in the back of their throats when they finally run out of ways to avoid saying the thing that needed saying years ago. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have recognized you the moment I walked in." "I'm sorry." Sarah looked down at him. The room held what it was feeling without releasing any of it, the way rooms do when they understand they are inside a moment that will not come again. She said quietly, "Get up, Admiral." He did. And every person in the Iron Flag, the SEAL with the red face, the contractor on the floor working on his breathing, the bartender with his hands flat on the counter, the old analyst with the coin, the captain with her hands still near her mouth, and the 20-odd veterans who had turned from their drinks to watch every one of them understood in that moment that the woman in the gray t-shirt was not who they had thought she was. They did not yet know who she actually was, but they understood that the distance between those two things was very large, and that they were about to cross it. Kowalski bent down and picked up his challenge coin from the floor. He held it in both hands and looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Sarah Cole with an expression that had nothing to do with the whiskey and everything to do with years of carrying something without any place to set it down. He sat back in his corner. He did not take his eyes off her. Outside in the parking lot, a black Suburban's engine finally went quiet. Admiral Beckett pulled a stool from the bar and sat down. Not at the end, not apart. In the middle, in the space the situation had already organized itself around. He reached for the glass of water that Briggs had placed in front of him without being asked. He did not drink from it. "October 15th, 2014, he said. He spoke the way men speak when they have rehearsed something many times without ever intending to say it out loud. "Operation Falcon's Gate, eastern Afghanistan, a compound 12 miles northeast of the Kunar River. 73 civilians inside, aid workers, medical staff, 3 families of local educators sheltering there for 11 days. The compound was surrounded. The extraction window was closing." He stopped. Sarah was looking at a point on the bar in front of her, not at the wood, at something beyond it. "The intel package said light resistance," Beckett continued. "1 to 2 dozen fighters poorly equipped, most likely to disperse at first contact. We sent 6 operators, the best 6 I had." He reached for his water. He set it back down untouched. "It was a trap, not an ambush. The word matters. An ambush is opportunistic. A trap is designed. Someone had fed us the intel. Someone had counted on us believing it. By the time the first boots hit the ground, there were 300 armed fighters inside the perimeter. Crew-served weapons, communications, a coordinated plan. The room had stopped pretending to do anything else. The first 15 minutes." He stopped. He tried again. "In the first 15 minutes, 5 of the 6 operators were killed." He said it without decoration, without the kind of language that tries to make tragedy sound like something other than what it is. The air in the Iron Flag changed, not the temperature, something else. The quality of attention in the room shifted from the attention of people watching a confrontation to the attention of people receiving news, and there is a difference between those two things that cannot be explained, but can always be felt. "One operator survived," Beckett said. "She was wounded in the initial contact. Wounds that should have ended the operation by any conventional assessment. She evaluated the situation, evaluated her resources, and made a decision." He looked at Sarah Cole. "She held that compound for 16 hours. He let those 6 words exist without addition for a moment. Alone, against a Taliban battalion. She used the compound's layout, the terrain, her own position, and a level of sustained marksmanship that I have never seen documented at that range in those conditions in 4 decades of service. She held them off the civilians. She held the perimeter. She moved all 73 people to the extraction point." A pause. "They all came home." Decker had sat down at some point without anyone seeing him do it. "The after-action report lists 67 wounds," Beckett said. "Gunshot, shrapnel, blast injuries from a device she was inside the effective radius of when it detonated. 2 cardiac events on the medevac flight. 8 months at Walter Reed under an assumed name." He set his hands flat on the bar. When the question arose of what to do with a surviving operator from a classified operation that had been a catastrophic intelligence failure, the decision was made to resolve the problem administratively. He said that last word the way a man says the thing he is most ashamed of. I co-signed the authorization, he said. I was a commander, then third in the chain on that decision. I was not the senior name on the document. He paused. That is not an excuse. I understood what I was signing. I signed it because I believed that following the chain upward was the same as doing the right thing, and I spent 10 years understanding exactly how wrong I was. He looked directly at Sarah. Master Chief Sarah Cole, call sign Ghost Zero, was officially listed as killed in action at Falcon's Gate. Her record was classified beyond compartmented access. Her identity ceased to exist in any system. When she was well enough to leave Walter Reed, she had no file, no record, no history of service. Everything she had been for 12 years was, he searched, corrected, on paper. The silence in the room had a texture now that was different from anything that had come before. Even Kowalski in his corner had set down his glass. Sarah's voice, when it came, was level. It cost her something to keep it that way. I don't need you to explain it to me, she said. I was there. It was not cruel, it was accurate, and the room understood the difference without needing it explained. Harlan moved his hands from the bar. He turned towards Sarah in the way of a man about to say something he has had time to prepare and is still not sure he is ready for. Before anything else gets said, he said, I need to tell you something first. She looked at him. I've known who you are for 3 years. She did not react immediately, or she reacted in a way that required knowing her well to see, which was that something behind her eyes went very quiet. In 2021, Harlan said, a man named Ashford was dying at Walter Reed. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks. He had spent 22 years as an analyst for the agency, and he had carried certain things for 22 years, and with 6 weeks remaining, he decided he was done carrying them. Harlan looked at his hands. He and I had a mutual connection, a man I'd served with who thought Ashford and I should talk. So we talked. He stopped for a moment. Ashford was in the room when the decision was made about Falcon's Gate. He knew the whole of it. He knew your name. He knew the hospital. He knew the city you'd ended up in. He told me he had watched the file periodically over the years to make sure nobody decided that a living Master Chief was a greater problem than a dead one. Sarah's jaw was set. When he told me, Harlan said, I had 2 options, report it through proper channels or not. He looked at her directly. I chose not. I drove to San Diego 3 weeks later. I found the ER at Coronado Medical. I sat in the parking lot for 4 hours and watched the staff come and go, and then I saw you walk out at the end of a shift. He stopped. I just needed to know you were real, he said, that you were actually there, that you were all right. The bar was absolutely still. I've come back, he said, periodically, not often. Enough. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. You could have said something, she said. I know. 3 years. I know. She looked away, then back. Why tonight, she said. Harlan reached into his jacket pocket. He set the challenge coin on the bar. He set it gently the way you set something down when the setting down is the statement itself. It was worn smooth on both faces. Whatever had been stamped into the metal had been handled so many thousands of times that the image was mostly gone, a ghost of a design, an outline of something that had once been specific and was now simply the shape of belonging to something. Sarah looked at it. She did not pick it up. He gave me that coin the night before Falcon's Gate, Harlan said. Wade, my brother. He said to hold on to it because he traveled light and coins were heavy. He paused. I told him coins weigh nothing. He said that was because I hadn't been carrying them long enough. Sarah's right hand moved slightly on the bar, an involuntary movement, the kind that happens below the level of decision. He wrote home every week, Harlan said. Even when there was nothing to say, he'd write something. Half a page sometimes. Just here, still here, thinking of you. But the last 6 months before Falcon's Gate, the letters changed. He started writing about the team. Harlan's voice was careful in the way of a man keeping something contained. He wrote about you specifically. A lot. Sarah was looking at the coin. He said you'd hum when things got bad. Old country music. Just under your breath, barely audible. He said he figured out after a while that it was so nobody could hear you were scared. Something crossed Sarah Cole's face. It was brief. In other circumstances, it would have been private. But there was no privacy left in this room tonight, and she was too tired to construct any, and so it crossed her face and everyone who was watching saw it. Her hand on the bar was trembling slightly. Not with fear, with the specific trembling of something that has been held very tightly for a very long time, pressing against a boundary it has never been given permission to cross. He was scared at the end, she said. Her voice was level. It cost her something to keep it that way. We all were, but Wade, she said the name the way you say the name of someone who isn't there with the weight of their absence inside the syllable. Wade was positioned in the northeastern corner. There was a breach coming from the adjacent structure. He could see the angle before I could. She stopped. He walked to the exterior door on the north wall, she said. He opened it and went through it. I had maybe 4 seconds to understand what he was doing. He was drawing their fire to himself so I could move to the civilians in the lower level. Nobody breathed. He knew what it meant, she said. He'd run the arithmetic. He knew. And he walked through that door like it was the most ordinary thing he had ever done in his life. She looked at the coin on the bar. He was humming, she said quietly. When he went through, I almost didn't catch it. Old Haggard song, the kind he would have said he didn't know the words to. Harlan put his hand flat on the bar. His jaw was working at something. Sarah picked up the coin. She held it for a moment. She turned it once with her thumb, feeling the worn surface, the smoothed-away image, the weight that was there if you had been carrying it long enough to feel it. She set it back down and pushed it toward Harlan. "Keep it," she said. "It should be with you." Harlan looked at the coin. He did not pick it up. "He'd want you to have it," he said. "You brought them home, all 73. He'd want it with someone who knows what that cost." He pushed it back. She looked at it for a moment. She did not push it back again. Around them, the iron flag held everything it was feeling without releasing any of it, the way a room does when it understands that the point of what's happening is between two people and a piece of worn metal and a name that has been carried 10 years without a place to be set down. Kowalski pressed the backs of his hands against his eyes for a moment. Then he lowered them and looked at the ceiling and then at the floor, and he made no sound at all. Sarah's phone rang, not a regular ringtone, a shorter, flatter sound, the kind of alert that exists to be distinguishable from everything else without explaining why. She looked at the screen. Her face went very still in a way that was different from ordinary stillness. Ordinary stillness is the absence of movement. What came over her face was the presence of control, which requires considerably more effort and looks different to anyone who knows how to see it. She answered. She listened without speaking for a long time. Then she said, "When?" She listened. "How many?" She listened. "Send me the package." She ended the call. She set the phone face down. She sat without moving for a moment. Then she turned to face the room. "His name is Tarek," she said. She said it the way you say the name of someone whose story you have already told yourself so many times it no longer needs introduction. He was 8 years old at Falcon's Gate. He and his sister Layla were the last group I moved to the extraction point. Layla had been shot in the leg. Tariq wouldn't leave her. He was 8 years old and he would not leave his 6-year-old sister. And while I was carrying both of them across 200 meters of open ground, with every fighter in that valley trying to end all 3 of us, he kept telling me he was going to be brave. She paused. While I was carrying him, he was trying to comfort me. She looked at her phone. He's 18 now. He's been running a school in Kabul for the last 2 years. Reading, writing, mathematics. Mostly girls in a district where the Taliban burns girls' schools on principle. He and Layla have kept it running. She stopped. 3 days ago, the Taliban took him. The room absorbed this in silence. They've been broadcasting, she said. Live. They know who he is. He has become a symbol in that region, the boy who survived Falcon's Gate, who grew up and built exactly what they destroy. They are going to execute him publicly, 72 hours from when they took him. She looked at the faces around her, and they put a name on the broadcast. She turned the phone screen up on the bar, a man in front of a concrete wall, Arabic text across the bottom, and in English in block letters above the Arabic 4 words that had been chosen with very specific intent. Ghost Zero, come home. They know I'm alive, she said. They have known for some time. This is not a hostage situation. This is a designed operation built specifically to draw me out, constructed around the one thing that was guaranteed to work. A child I told I would always watch over. She said it without bitterness and without accusation, as a simple description of the situation as it existed. Decker had been quiet for the last 20 minutes. The man who had walked in loud and certain had been replaced by someone doing the hard work of understanding a world that had turned out to be more complicated than his working model had accounted for. He said from his stool, "You can't go. You don't have active status. You don't have—" "I was a civilian last Tuesday," Sarah said, "when I had 3 gunshot victims on tables simultaneously and the attending on call was 20 minutes out and the ER tech was 19 and hyperventilating in the corner. I managed that situation with the resources available. She looked at him steadily. The job does not check your paperwork. Decker had no answer for that. Mercer spoke. She had been quiet through the last half hour, and her voice when it came was different. The authority was still there, but the certainty that had been underneath it, the certainty she had walked in with, was gone. Something more honest had replaced it. "What would you need?" she said. It was a different question than anyone else had asked. Everyone else had been making statements. Mercer had asked a question, and Sarah recognized the difference, and she acknowledged it with a slight shift of her attention. "That depends," Sarah said, "on what's possible." Harlan moved. He moved as he had moved all evening, without announcement, without drama. A shift of his frame from one position to another that communicated that he had been waiting for a specific moment, and this was it. 12 operators, he said. He said it the way you say a fact that has been waiting for the right moment. All Tier 1 experience. Combined service somewhere north of 200 years. All currently private citizens. All volunteers. No paycheck. No orders. No official anything. He looked at Sarah. They have been on standby for 3 years. Since the night I sat in the parking lot of Coronado Medical and understood what I was looking at. The room was very still. "When I found out you were alive," Harlan said, "I began making calls. Quietly over months I found that people who had connection to Falcon's Gate, people who had lost friends there, people who had known the operators who didn't come home, people who understood what you did and had spent 10 years with nowhere to put that understanding. I told them what I knew. I told them that if the day came when you needed backing, I wanted to be able to make one call." 3 years, Sarah said. 3 years. She looked at him. "You organized a covert extraction capability around a woman who didn't know you existed," she said. "Yes." Without asking her. "Yes, a push. That is," Sarah said, and for the first time in 2 hours something moved in her voice that had not been planned for the most operationally presumptuous thing I have heard in a very long time. "Probably," Harlan said without apparent distress. Decker stood up from his stool. He rolled his shoulders once the way a man does when he has decided something and is aligning his body with the decision. "Count me in," he said. Mercer looked at him. "You don't have sanction," she said. "No." Decker agreed. He said it without apology. Something had changed in his face across the course of the evening, something foundational. He had walked in carrying the uncomplicated confidence of a man who had never been wrong about himself in any way that mattered. That version of himself was not coming back, and the thing replacing it was more honest and, in the long run, more useful. He looked at Sarah. "In team rooms," he said, "there is a story that gets told, not by name, not with details, about an operator who was left behind in a way that was wrong, who did something that shouldn't have been possible, and who disappeared. I have been telling that story for 4 years without knowing who it was about." He stopped. "I know now." Sarah looked at him. "You're good," she said. "Your record shows it. 3 bronze stars is not luck." He waited. "But being good at the Mazo," she said, "is not the same as understanding what the bot costs." He received this without argument. Victor raised one large hand from where he was sitting, still working carefully on his breathing. "I also," he said, "am coming." Beckett had his phone out. He spoke in the low, specific tones of a man who is rearranging things that are not supposed to be rearranged. "Officially," he said to the room, "I am not here tonight. This conversation did not happen. Whatever follows from it does not exist in any record." He looked at Sarah. "Unofficially, whatever you need, you have it." Mercer stepped forward. "You understand what they're expecting," she said. Her voice had shed the last of the register she'd been using earlier. What remained was something more honest and considerably more direct. "They've used his name publicly. They've made the trap obvious. They want you to know it's a trap." "Yes," Sarah said, "and you're going anyway." She looked at Mercer. "There is an 18-year-old in a room in Kabul who was 8 years old when he told me he was going to be brave while I was carrying him across 200 meters of fire." She reached into the front pocket of her jeans and placed the challenge coin on the bar. She looked at it for one moment. Then she picked it up and put it in her vest pocket. "He kept that school open for 2 years in a district that burns them. He did that because he believed something was worth believing in." She stood. "They built this trap around the idea that I will come. They are not wrong about that. What they are wrong about is what happens when I get there." She looked around the room one more time. These were the same people who had tried to humiliate her an hour ago. In every face now she saw the same thing. Not guilt, though that was present. Something beyond it. the recognition that some situations are larger than personal history. She walked to the door. She stopped with one hand on the handle. She did not turn around. Wade walked through a door so I could bring them home, she said. The room was absolutely still. I'm going to make that mean something, she said. She walked out into the October night, and the door closed behind her with the sound of a period at the end of a very long sentence. For several seconds, no one moved. Then Harlan reached for his phone, and the machinery of something unofficial and necessary and very dangerous began quietly to turn. The Hindu Kush does not care about you. That is the first thing you understand when you arrive in that country, and it is the last thing you forget when you leave it. The mountains do not distinguish between people who have come to build and people who have come to destroy. They are simply there, enormous and indifferent, older than every war ever fought in their shadow, and they will be there long after the last one ends. Sarah Cole had not been back in 10 years. She stepped off the ramp of the cargo plane at Bagram at 4:43 in the morning, and the cold hit her all at once, not gradually the way it always had, like a door opening onto a room where the temperature is a fact rather than a condition. The smell was the same, aviation fuel and dust, and something underneath both of those that her body recognized without language. She stood at the bottom of the ramp for a moment, not hesitating, noting. The gear on her shoulders was familiar in the way things are familiar when they have been part of you for years and then absent for years and then returned. Not like putting on old clothes, more like the moment in a long illness when you remember physically what it was like to be well. Harlan materialized from beside a line of vehicles without announcement, with the quality of presence that suggested he had been exactly where he was for considerably longer than seemed possible. "Sit rep," she said. She fell into the rhythm of it, the way you fall into a language you grew up speaking and then spent years not speaking. It comes back whole, not incrementally. Harlan pulled a tablet from his vest. Satellite imagery, high resolution, recent. A compound northeast of their position, 20 kilometers in a valley, she recognized the shape of before she could articulate why, and then she realized it was because she had memorized the terrain of this region so completely 10 years ago that the topography had become part of her internal geography. Same region as Falcon's Gate, she said. 2 ridgelines east, different valley. She studied the image. High walls, single primary access from the south, 3 elevated positions on the surrounding terrain, each offering sightlines across the approaches. A structure at the center with no ground floor windows. That's where they're holding them, she said, touching the central structure. Our assessment as well. Early warning coverage here, here, and here. She indicated the elevated terrain. Any air approach gets flagged 15 minutes out. They've learned from the last time. They've also placed additional fighters at these 2 positions. Harlan zoomed the image. The positioning is not optimal for defense. It's theatrical. It's meant to be seen from a specific direction. They want me to feel the weight of it before I arrive, Sarah said. They want the specific kind of fear that comes from arithmetic. Yes. It won't be from the air. She traced her finger along the northeastern edge of the compound. And it won't be the approach they're watching. 11 figures stood in a line beside the vehicles. She walked the line slowly. Decker was 4th from the left. He met her eyes without performance. What was in his face now was simpler and more serious and considerably more useful than what had been there 4 days ago. Victor was 6th, ribs taped under his vest expression, carrying the controlled neutrality of a professional who has reclassified a prior embarrassment as data about the past. Mercer stood at the end of the line. The posture of an officer was still there, but the thing underneath it, the performance of certainty, was gone. The actual substance remained. Sarah stopped in front of the line. 48 hours ago, most of you didn't know I existed, she said. Some of you were working hard to prove I didn't belong in your bar. She paused. None of that is relevant to the next 6 hours. What is relevant is this. She looked at them one by one. There are 14 people in that compound. Tariq and his sister Layla, who are there because they spent 2 years building something the Taliban destroys on principle, and 12 women who taught children to read in a district where that is treated as a capital offense. She let that settle. We are bringing all 14 of them home. Not most, not the ones we reach before the situation becomes complicated. All 14. Nobody spoke. I'm going to walk to the front gate, she said, alone, unarmed visibly. They've invited Ghost Zero to come home, and Ghost Zero is going to accept. They need to believe I've come alone and desperate that guilt and obligation have overridden judgment, and I've walked into their trap exactly as designed. If they believe that they will focus everything forward toward me in the performance they've planned for their cameras. She indicated the northeastern section of the image, which means they will not be watching the approach through the secondary drainage channel that was impassable 10 years ago because of seasonal water levels and is passable now because a decade of erosion has changed the grade. You'll be in position before I reach the outer perimeter. All their elevated coverage faces south and west. The northeastern ridge is their blind spot because the drainage approach looks impossible. She looked at them. You'll have eyes on me from the moment I enter the valley. You hold until you hear me count to 1. Then you act on your assignments. Every position has been mapped. Every contingency has been considered. She paused. The plan will not survive contact exactly as designed. Plans never do. What will survive is your training and your judgment, and both of those are sufficient for what this requires. Mercer said, and if they shoot before you reach one, then you act on the shot. But they won't. They've made this a public production. They've announced it. They need the moment documented. They will not waste it before their audience is fully assembled. She looked at the mountains to the east, where the sky was beginning to differentiate from the ridgeline in the faintest separation between black and dark blue. 2 hours, she said. Everyone rests, eat, check equipment twice. Think about why you're here because that clarity is the thing that keeps people alive when the situation stops resembling the plan. She looked at Harlan. He stepped away. The others followed. She stood alone beside the vehicles with the cold coming down from the mountains, and she reached into her vest pocket and found the coin. She held it in her closed fist and she did not pray because she was not a woman who prayed, but she did something that served the same function, which was to allow herself to be fully present to what she was about to do and what it might cost and to make the choice again consciously with full information, knowing everything she knew. She opened her hand. She looked at the worn face of the coin. She closed her hand again. 2 hours later, as dawn laid its first gray light along the eastern ridgelines, Sarah Cole walked across the valley floor toward the southern gate of the Taliban compound. She walked at a measured pace, not slow enough to suggest reluctance, not fast enough to suggest urgency. The pace of someone who has made a decision and is implementing it without drama. Her hands were at her sides, open, visible. She wore no visible armor. She carried nothing that read as a weapon to any eye watching from the walls. There were many eyes watching from the walls. At 200 meters, the shapes on the walls resolved into figures, men with weapons positioned in the theatrical overabundance she had predicted arranged to communicate weight and inevitability to the person approaching alone across open ground. 2 cameras on the southern wall broadcasting. She did not alter her pace. At 100 meters, the gate opened. The commander came out ahead of his men, not young. His face carried the weathering of decades in this specific landscape, doing this specific kind of work. And his eyes had the flatness that comes not from absence of intelligence, but from the long practice of suppressing everything intelligence produces except one dedicated function. He stopped 20 feet in front of the gate. 4 fighters flanked him. He waited. She stopped 12 feet from him. Ghost Zero, he said in English. Practiced words. The American ghost. The woman who survived Falcon's Gate. He looked at her the way men look at things they have waited a long time to possess. You received our invitation. I'm here for Tariq, she said. Her voice carried across the morning air without effort. Release him and the others. You want me. 1 life for 14. That is the exchange. He smiled, the smile of a trap closing. You think you have leverage, he said. You walk to us alone with nothing. He gestured to the walls, the weapons, the assembled force of months of planning. You are already finished. The only question remaining is the order. He raised one hand toward the gate. 2 fighters emerged with Tariq. He was taller than she had expected. Lean, hands bound, a cut above his left eye untreated. He walked without being dragged, which told her something important about who he had become. When his eyes found her across the distance between them, they did not fill with the relief that most people's eyes fill with when rescue becomes visible. They filled with something more complex, recognition, grief, a specific horror that said he understood exactly what her presence here meant and did not want it to mean that. No, he said, clear, steady. You shouldn't have come. Later, she said. She looked at the commander. 17, she said. He frowned. 16. Her voice was level, conversational. What are you, 15? Her pace did not change. The commander's expression moved from confusion toward anger. He raised his weapon. Fighters on the walls raised theirs. She felt the targeting pressure of it, the way you feel weather. 13. You are alone, he said, irritation sharpening his voice now. Not fear. The irritation of a man whose performance is being disrupted by someone who has not read the script. There is nothing out there. You came alone. 11. He shouted something in Pashto toward the walls. 10. She heard the compound come alive behind the walls, the sound of men repositioning, a force that has been holding still suddenly in motion. 9. Tariq was watching her, his bound hands gripped together. His jaw was set. He was doing the thing he had told her he would do years ago in a different valley in the worst moment of his young life. He was being brave. 8. The barrel of the commander's weapon pressed against her forehead. The metal was cold. She held his eyes. 6. Soap, he said. Flick him. So. 4. He pulled back the hammer. 3. She breathed at the rate she had trained herself to breathe when she needed to be less afraid than she was. 2. His finger moved to the trigger. 1. 12 shots came from 12 different positions along the northeastern ridge, so nearly simultaneously that the sound arrived as a single compressed event, and then the valley was in motion in a way that bore no resemblance to the second before. The commander was down. The fighters beside him were down. The elevated positions that had been arranged to watch the southern and western approaches were discovering in the last moments available to them for discovery that the approach they had not been watching had been the consequential one. The trap had been built to close on her. It had closed on them. Sarah was already moving. She had been in motion before the echo reached her rotating left, dropping to one knee, her hand finding the weapon she had not visibly carried. She moved through the compound entrance with the forward economy of a person navigating a space they have already mapped completely, using the confusion and the fallen bodies as cover, placing her movement along lines of least resistance. Harlan's voice through her earpiece. North wall clear. East structure secure. Inner courtyard 3 active. She went left. The inner courtyard was enclosed on 3 sides and open on the 4th toward the main gate. 2 fighters were moving toward the sound of the breach away from her. She engaged both without slowing. The 3rd had better instincts and was positioned behind a concrete pillar, and the exchange that followed was brief and technical, and ended the way such exchanges end when one participant has spent 12 years developing skills the other has not. Inner courtyard clear. While structure 2, basement access on the south interior wall. Briggs and Decker are 30 seconds behind you. She found the eastern corridor first. Tariq was there 30 feet inside the gate, on his knees beside the wall where the fighters holding him had dropped him when the first shots came. His hands were still bound. He was not hurt beyond the cut above his eye. She cut the binding with the blade from her vest. She put one hand on his shoulder for 1 second. Can you move? Yes. Stay with Briggs. He'll be through that door in 40 seconds. She went left. The basement door was steel padlocked from the outside. She shot the lock, pulled the door, found stairs going down into darkness, and went down. A single large room, low ceiling, bare concrete, the air cold and stale and close. A single bulb in the ceiling casting everything in sharp shadow. She counted before she had fully stopped moving. 13 people. She crossed the room to where Layla was sitting against the far wall, legs stretched in front of her, watching Sarah with the wide-open recognition of someone who has been told a story so many times that the subject has become more legend than person, and who is now confronted with the fact that legends are sometimes also just a woman in tactical gear, with dust on her boots and a specific expression in her eyes that Layla recognized because she had been 8 years old the last time she saw it, and she had never forgotten it. Sarah crouched in front of her. Your leg, she said, looking at the old scar visible beneath torn fabric. The same leg. Does it hold? It has held for 10 years, Layla said. Sarah produced bolt cutters from her vest and cut the chain at Layla's wrists. She moved to the next person and the next, working down the line with systematic speed, and behind her Decker and Briggs came down the stairs, and Harlan's voice in her ear confirmed that the outer perimeter was secured and the extraction timeline was holding. She stood. We move quickly and closely, she said. You stay with the person in front of you. You do not stop. If you lose the line for any reason, you stop, you make yourself small, and you wait. We will come back. She looked at each face. Is there anyone who cannot move under their own power? No one. Then let's go. They moved through the compound in a formation with Decker at the rear, Briggs in the middle, and Sarah at the front, and the systematic work that Harlan's team had done in the preceding hours was evident in the quality of the silence around them. The silence of a space that has been made safe, rather than one that is simply holding its breath. The courtyard, the gate, the open ground beyond. The extraction point was a plateau 200 meters north. The sound of rotors reached them before they cleared the wall. Two helicopters in holding pattern. The pilots working from a flight plan that did not officially exist. They moved across open ground. Sarah counted as they moved. 1, 2, 3, 4. Layla at her left shoulder keeping pace, the old scar doing exactly what Layla had said it would. 5, 6, 7, 8. The women moving with the focused attention of people who have decided that fear is not useful information right now and have set it aside for later. 9, 10, 11, and 12. 13, 14. She turned one last time. Tariq was behind the group with Decker's hand on his shoulder, moving without difficulty, his eyes finding hers across the distance. 14. She turned back toward the plateau. The helicopters were settling as they arrived, rotors churning the fine dust of the valley floor in expanding circles. The crew chief was at the door of the first aircraft, counting people in the professional speed of someone for whom this specific action is the most important thing happening on Earth at this moment. 1, 2, 3. She stood at the edge of the plateau and watched them board, running the perimeter simultaneously. The valley below was still. The compound in the growing morning light, the disrupted positions, the open gate, the silence that had replaced organized force. 8, 9, 10, movement, peripheral vision, low. Eastern edge of the plateau, from behind a shelf of rocks she had not fully cleared. The timeline had been tight. The secondary assessment had said minimal residual threat. She had trusted it. She turned. He was 16 years old. She knew this not from his face obscured by dust and shadow, but from his frame, the frame of someone who has not finished becoming what they are going to be, wearing the clothing of the compound's fighters, holding an AK-47 so old that the finish had worn completely from the receiver, holding it the way people hold weapons when they are terrified and determined simultaneously, with too much force in the hands and not enough in the feet, a grazing wound across the left side of his head, blood dried dark along his temple. The barrel was pointed at Sarah. Behind her, she felt 11 operators acquire the target simultaneously. The small mechanical certainty of training producing its automatic response. She raised her left hand. Open. Palm back. The operators held. She looked at the boy. He was shaking. In the specific way people shake when the body is running a response, the mind did not fully authorize the adrenaline of a situation that has moved completely outside any prior experience. His eyes above the barrel were dark and very young, and operating at the edge of something she recognized because she had stood at that same edge herself in a different valley on a different morning, and she knew exactly what it looked like from the outside. He was deciding. She kept her hand raised. She kept her eyes on his. She breathed at the rate of deliberate calm, the rate slower than her body wanted and faster than stillness. She spoke in Pashto, quietly, without urgency. Go home to your mother, she said. His hands tightened on the weapon. This war has taken enough children, she said. You are still a child. You don't have to be what they made you. Go home. The barrel wavered. She watched his eyes because that was the information, not the weapon. There is a boy behind me, she said. He is 18 years old. When he was 8, he was in exactly the place you are standing right now. He chose something different. He built a school. He opened a door that had been closed. She paused. You can open a door too. You just have to put down the rifle first. The wavering in the barrel increased. His face was doing what faces do when the actual decision is being made, not performed, not managed, but made at whatever level decisions are genuinely made below language and strategy, in the place where a person finds out who they are when all the external pressures are stripped away. The rifle came down, not thrown, not dropped, lowered slowly until the muzzle pointed at the ground, and then the boy's hands released it, and it fell, and he stepped backward once, then again, and then he turned and disappeared into the morning shadow at the base of the eastern ridge, and then he was gone. The plateau was very still. Decker's voice came from just behind her left shoulder. How did you know he wouldn't shoot? She looked at the space where the boy had been. I didn't, she said. She turned back to the helicopters. Everyone board, she said. They lifted at 6:42. Sarah sat in the forward section of the first aircraft with her back against the bulkhead. She closed her eyes. She felt the aircraft banking away from the valley, the nose coming around north altitude, increasing as they cleared the ridgeline, the mountains falling away below them, enormous and permanent, and absolutely indifferent to everything that had just happened in their shadow. She did not open her eyes for several minutes. When she did, Tariq was sitting across from her. He was looking at her with an expression she could not fully categorize, which was unusual because she had spent years cataloging the expressions of people in extreme circumstances. It was not simply relief, though relief was part of it. It was not simply gratitude. It was the expression of a person who has thought carefully about something over a long period of time and has arrived at a position that is both certain and costly. "You came back," he said. "I said I would. You said you would always watch over me. You said it when you were carrying me across open ground with the people shooting at you from 3 directions." He was quiet for a moment. "I have thought about that sentence many times over 10 years. I thought it was something people say in situations like that because the situation requires something to be said. That the real meaning was simply that you hoped to survive long enough to get us to safety." He looked at her steadily. "I was wrong," he said. She said nothing. "What you did," he said. "Coming here, you had a life, work that mattered, people who needed you." A pause. "You put all of that at risk because of a promise you made to an 8-year-old boy." "I had every obligation," she said. "You were wounded 67 times. Not all at once." Something moved across his face that was the closest he had come to a genuine smile in 4 days. "Why?" he said. The word at the beginning of a sentence whose remaining words had not yet arrived. She looked at her hands for a moment. "Because the people who walk through the door so that others can survive," she said, "deserve to have that walk mean something. Wade walked through a door at Falcon's Gate so I could reach you and your sister and 61 other people. If I live in a way that doesn't honor that, then his going through that door was simply a death. But it was not simply a death. It was a choice. A specific, conscious, deliberate choice made by a man who knew exactly what it meant." She paused. "You don't dishonor a choice like that by spending the next 10 years hiding from it." Tariq was quiet for a moment. "The school," he said. "Yes. Layla and I were not trying to be brave," he said. "We were trying to be useful. It seemed like the only available response to being alive when others were not." She looked at him. "That," she said, "is exactly what brave is." Across from him, Layla reached over and put her hand on top of his. He turned his palm up and held it. Sarah closed her eyes. She was home in San Diego by Thursday. The Thursday after that, she was back in the emergency room. The Thursday after that, Harlan was across from her at a diner 3 blocks from the hospital. They did not discuss Afghanistan. They talked about his retirement, which had been 6 years ago, and which he had not yet fully accommodated himself to. They talked about the iron flag, and whether Briggs had fixed the corner stool that had been loose for as long as anyone could remember. They drank coffee and then more coffee, and they sat in the comfortable quiet of two people who have been through something together that does not need to be spoken to be present between them. He slid the discharge papers across the table before the second coffee arrived. The real ones. Official, full honors. Every benefit, every recognition, every acknowledgement that had been erased a decade ago, restored by a commander who had spent the last month in rooms with people who had authority and used it, according to Harlan, to correct what he had described in those rooms as the worst professional decision of his career. She looked at the papers for a long time. Her name in print on government letterhead that was current and real and not classified beyond existence. Master Chief Sarah Cole, United States Army, honorably discharged, full record restored. She folded the papers carefully and put them in her jacket pocket. She picked up her coffee. "The stool is still loose," she said. "I checked last week." "Briggs will fix it when he's ready," Harlan said. "He has his own timeline." 2 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in December, her phone rang in the break room of the Coronado Medical Emergency Department, International Prefix. A connection from overseas routed through more than one point before arriving the call, quality having the particular flatness that routing produces. She answered. A young woman's voice. Clear, careful with her words, choosing each one with the specific attention of someone who understands that language is a tool, and tools should be used precisely. "Miss Cole, my name is Fazila. I was a student at Tariq and Layla's school." Sarah set down her lunch. "He told me about you," the voice said. "He told all of us. He told us about the woman who carried him when he was 8 years old, who came back when he was 18. He told us you were a nurse, that you had been a soldier, and that you had chosen to stop taking lives and start saving them, and that this had not made you less dangerous, but more because you understood exactly what you were protecting." A pause. "I received an acceptance letter this week. Medical school, in Boston. Full scholarship." Sarah Cole had held patients' hands while they died. She had administered last rites in languages she barely spoke because the person dying needed something human present. She had stood in an Afghan valley with a rifle barrel pressed against her forehead and counted backward from 17 without letting her voice change. She sat in the break room of a San Diego emergency department, and for a moment she did not trust her voice. "What will you study?" she said when she did. "Emergency medicine," Fazila said. "Tariq told us that you showed him that surviving is not enough, that you have to decide what the surviving is for." She paused. "I have decided what mine is for." Outside the break room window, December light lay flat and pale over the water. Somewhere in that city, people were going through doors they did not yet know were the consequential ones, making choices that would not look like choices for years. The consequences of those choices invisible yet already in motion. "Congratulations, Fazila," Sarah said. She meant it with everything she had. "Tariq says you are coming to visit," Fazila said, "when the school is rebuilt." "I am," Sarah said. "It will be rebuilt," Fazila said, with the certainty of someone for whom this is not optimism, but simply fact. "We have already started." On the first Friday of January, she arrived at the Iron Flag early. Decker was already there, which no longer surprised her. He was at the bar with a glass of water, which was different from the last time, and his posture was different, and the quality of his presence was different, in a way that was difficult to articulate precisely except to say that it had shed its performance and found something more durable underneath. He looked up when she came in. He started to stand. She waved him back down and took the stool beside him. "Briggs came over," she said. "2 waters and whatever he's having." Briggs nodded and turned away. Mercer arrived 5 minutes later. Then Victor, moving with the careful deliberateness of a man whose ribs were completing their argument with the healing process. Then Harlan, who had been watching his watch for an hour and arrived at the correct minute by intention rather than chance. Beckett sent a message through Harlan. Brief, not official in any sense. It said that he was glad it had gone the way it went, that some errors could be corrected, and that this had been one of them. Kowalski was in his corner. When Sarah came in, he raised 2 fingers from the table. The same gesture. She acknowledged it the same way with a slight turn of her head. He went back to his glass. The challenge coin was on the table in front of him. She understood that it would be there every time she came in because Kowalski was a man who needed something to keep track of. And this was what he had chosen. And some choices are not made once, but continuously every day. Every Thursday, every time you show up. She sat with her people. She drank her water. The Iron Flag was warm around them. The jukebox was playing something old and familiar. The corner stool was still loose because some things take their own time, and the bar was exactly what it always was, which was a room where people who had been somewhere could come without having to explain anything. Outside the Pacific was doing in January what the Pacific always does in January, reminding you with cold indifference that it was there before you and will be there after. 2 weeks later on a Sunday morning, a knock at her apartment door. Not a ring, a knock, 3 times evenly spaced. The knock of someone who has been trained to communicate precisely and does so even in gestures this small. A courier. Young civilian clothes worn on a frame, clearly more accustomed to something less civilian. He handed her an envelope. He did not wait for a signature. He walked back to the elevator without looking back. She stood in the doorway with the envelope. She went inside. She set it on the kitchen counter. She poured coffee. She stood at the window and looked at the city and the water beyond it, flat and gray and enormous, in the winter morning light, and she let the morning be what it was for a moment before she changed it. She opened the envelope. A single page. No letterhead that meant anything to the ordinary world. A design in the header that she recognized not from any official record, but from a briefing she had attended once in a room where the chairs were bolted to the floor and the windows were painted over, and the people at the table had been introduced by single names that were not their names. The message was 11 words. Ghost 0. Your specific skills are needed. Consulting basis only. Interested. Below it, a name she had heard twice before. Once through a phone in a bar. Once at the end of a mission that didn't officially occur. Blackjack. And below that, coordinates. She entered them into her mapping application and watched the pin drop. Chicago, North Side, a neighborhood where 3 separate investigative reports had been filed over the past 8 months, each pointing toward the same pattern, each stalling at the same point, where the thread encountered something more organized and better resourced than the investigators following it. Children. She set the phone on the counter. She picked up the challenge coin. She held it in her closed fist, feeling the worn, smooth face of it, the weight that was there if you had been carrying it long enough. Wade had been right about that. She had been carrying it for 3 months now, and it had not gotten lighter. It had become more familiar, which was a different thing entirely. She opened her hand. She looked at the coin. She thought about Fazila, who was going to study emergency medicine in Boston because someone once made a choice about what the surviving was for. She thought about the boy on the plateau, 16 years old, who had put down his rifle in the morning shadow and walked away, and who was somewhere right now making whatever the next choice was and the one after that. She thought about Wade, who had walked through a door without hesitation, who had been humming an old song when he did it, who had known exactly what it meant and had done it anyway, because some things are larger than the person doing them, and because he had understood, in the way that certain people understand certain things at the moment they most need to, that the right choice and the costly choice are sometimes the same choice. She thought about what Tariq had said on the helicopter, that surviving was not enough, that you had to decide what the surviving was for. She looked out the window at the city, thousands of lights, each one a life, each one a story, a door, a choice not yet made or already made, or being made right now in some kitchen, in some apartment where someone was standing at a window trying to figure out what came next. She put the coin in the front pocket of her jeans. She picked up her phone. She dialed. One ring. "Blackjack," a voice said. She looked out at the city and the water, and the winter morning that was the same as every other morning and completely different from every other morning. "It's Ghost Zero," she said, a pause that had the quality of something that has been held for a long time and is now finally being released. "We've been waiting," the voice said. "You won't have to wait anymore," she said. She ended the call. She set the phone on the counter beside the coin and the coffee and the envelope, with its 11 words and its coordinates and its name. She stood in the quiet of her kitchen. She looked at the city. She allowed herself one full moment to be completely aware of the threshold she was standing on, what it meant, and what it would cost, and to make the choice with full information, eyes open, knowing everything she knew. The moment passed. She picked up her coffee, and she began to plan.